The next phase is the so-called sentencing or mitigation phase, where the prosecution will argue that Mr. Tsarnaev deserves the death penalty. The defense will argue that he should only get life in prison. What happens specifically is that the federal government, the prosecution, will put on evidence of so-called aggravating factors, that these crimes were committed in a particularly heinous, depraved, or cruel manner, that they involve substantial planning and preparation, and or that they involved especially vulnerable victims. In other words, to get the death penalty, you can't just prove guilt, you have to prove guilt plus an aggravating factor. Whereas the defense will argue for mitigation. They'll argue for reasons why his life should be spared. Specifically, I think that they will argue that he is quote unquote a minor participant in relationship to his brother Tamerlan, and that he may have been acting under duress, that he was perhaps coerced or pressured by his older brother. There's no question about him being free one day. This is a man who either will be sentenced to life in prison for the rest of his life, really for the rest of his life, or will be sentenced to death. So there isn't a concern about him eventually being freed. I think in Boston, before yesterday, some people had that concern. Some people were worried that he would somehow be acquitted. Now that he's been convicted, I think we can focus more on what the penalty ought to be.